After the mass shooting in Connecticut that left 28 dead, people were looking for answers. And one of the easiest first answers they went to was video games. On Sunday, Senator Joe Lieberman went on to Fox News to say that producers of violent video games and movies must tone it down because violent entertainment is a causative factor to violence. As has Representative Jason Chaffetz, he went on this week on ABC to say that violent realism found in games and movies was making young adults unable to make the transition from their teen years to adulthood. In their articles, Reuters and the Drudge Report found the fact that the gunman had been involved in his high school's tech club and had played video games so important, so essential to his character, that it was put in headlines and early on in the articles. Early on in the investigation, when the gunman's identity was thought to have been his brother's because he was holding his ID, people were quick to find his profile on Facebook and note that he had liked the Mass Effect video game, using that as a reason why the shootings could have happened, immediately calling for a ban on violent video games. But here's a little reality check. Violent crime has dropped since 1991, when video games started having more mass appeal, not to mention progressively better and more realistic graphics. Major studies from the Harvard Medical School Center for Mental Health and the British Medical Journal found no correlation between violent video games and violent activity. And a recent study in Germany found aggressive children gravitated toward more violent games, not the other way around. The truth is, this is scapegoating. Politicians, policymakers, parents, and advocates don't understand gaming, so it's easy for them to lump these people who have that hobby into a group, to classify them as degenerate, as violent people, when really, gamers aren't all 10-year-olds in their basement or people who are socially inadequate. Just remember, there are millions of people worldwide that play games, and only a small percentage that went on a mass shooting. What if they had found another similar hobby correlated between people who had committed mass shootings? What if they found they all listened to the same music, or all skateboarded, or all ate Doritos, or all played chess? Would they unfairly blame those activities as causative factors for why they committed those acts? No. It's so much easier to talk about how a disturbed 20-year-old fired fake guns in a virtual world than it would be to have a real, hard conversation about mental health or gun control. So, it might seem crazy to us now, but in the 1950s, comic books were the scapegoat of the era, with parents blamed for making their kids too violent and degenerative. So they set up the Comics Code Authority, a group to censor comics so they were presentable to kids. And they had many stipulations, including no comic shall explicitly present the unique details of a method or crime. In every instance, good shall triumph over evil and the criminal punished for his misdeed. No comic can use the word horror or terror in its title. Excessive slang is discouraged, and the treatment of romance stories shall emphasize the value of home and the sanctity of marriage. Those are the rules they had to keep people safe. The three largest consumer markets for video games are North America, Japan, and Europe. But according to PolitiFact, the US gun homicide rate is 15 times higher than the other 22 high-income countries across the world. This would indicate that no, video games are not the problem, it must be something else. Perhaps we should look at how we cover the news. I worked for local news for many years, and I think they do a lot of things wrong. They could do them better. But one thing they did right was to not cover suicides and to not name people who had committed suicides in a public way. This was so as to not glorify the act. Why can't this be applicable to mass murders? I mean, we can still cover the story, but do we have to identify the gunman? Do we have to let his name live in infamy as someone who was a monster rather than just a sick individual who had perhaps killed himself? To conclude, I don't know why this happened. I don't think anyone really does. The field of pseudo-commando rampage violence isn't really well understood, and it's only starting to begin to be researched as a field. And while I commend people for having heavy hearts and feeling for the victims and searching for answers, looking to the easiest answer is not the solution, and unnecessarily denigrating and demeaning a subset of the population that's only growing larger is not the solution.